So some people, when they're reading the Bible or when they're praying, they say, I feel so stressed out. I feel so anxious when I'm reading the Bible. I feel so stressed out when I'm in prayer. And this isn't the case always, but sometimes the reason why there's anxiety when people are reading the word or anxiety when they're praying is because they're actually led by self-will and they're using the flesh to accomplish certain goals. So they're coming into prayer and they're coming and reading the word with an agenda. And this causes anxiety because they may keep making resolutions and they keep failing because they're out of the will of God and God is withdrawing his grace in order to try and steer them in the right direction. And so this isn't always the case, but it is a lot of the times when people are saying, I'm reading the Bible and I just feel stressed out. I'm trying to fast and I feel so anxious. Why is this? This is oftentimes because they're led by self-will. And what they're trying to do is because they're led by self-will, they're using the flesh to accomplish their goals. There's anxiety because they're making these resolutions. They're coming with a certain agenda that is not inspired by God. And what happens is they've had a history of making resolutions and failing. And that is what causes the anxiety. For example, they say, God, I'm going to pray this much. God, I'm going to fast this much. I'm going to read my word this much. What happens is they're motivated by self-will and they haven't found exactly what the will of the Lord is. And because of that, they're using the flesh. And when you use the flesh, there's no grace. And God actually withdraws grace in order to try and steer you in the right direction. So for example, someone may come into prayer or they're reading the Bible and they say, I want to read Genesis. But the Lord, the Spirit of God is saying, actually, I want you to focus on meditating on the Beatitudes, right? But they're saying, I want to read Genesis because they have their own agenda, their own way of trying to sanctify themselves, or maybe they're seeking the Bible for head knowledge. Whatever it is, their self-will is getting involved with the flow of the Spirit. So same thing, when some people decide, I'm going to do a 10-day fast, 10-day water fast, and I'm going to read the Bible for 8 hours and all these things. And they find that, man, as I'm trying to do this, I'm not at peace. And why is that? Because they're operating in the flesh and there's no grace. And so oftentimes what will happen is they'll keep failing because God is actually trying to get them to stop their dead works and to start submitting to God's will. And so there's a block that is happening because God does not want people to pursue their own dead works because it produces self-righteousness and selfish ambition. And so in some cases, when people are in prayer or they're reading the word and they feel anxious and stressed out, this can sometimes be the reason is because they're trying to read the Bible and they're trying to pray with their own agenda. And so now it's hard to read the word. It's dry to read the word. And now it becomes routine. It becomes burdensome. There's no life there. And that's why Jesus rebuked the Pharisees. He says, you search the scriptures because you think that in them you have life, but yet you refuse to come to me. And many people who have the religious spirit, that's what they're doing. When they come into prayer, when they come and read their Bible, when they do these religious activities, they're not submitting themselves to God, saying, God, what do you want me to read? What do you want me to pray? What is your agenda? Well, how do you want to lead me? Instead, they're coming with self-will. I have an agenda. I have a plan. This is how things are going to go. This is what I'm going to study, etc., etc. And so oftentimes what it feels like is it feels like they're swimming upstream. And one way you know you're walking in self-will and not in the will of God is when you make resolutions. And when you try to accomplish these resolutions, you find that you're swimming upstream and there's this anxiety that is present. Why is the anxiety present, like we talked about? It's because they're trusting in themselves to be able to accomplish it, right? So they're not trusting in the grace of God to carry them because it was their own plan. It was their own scheming. It was their own self-will. And they're still holding on to control. So it's this holding on to control, this holding on to your own plans and your own ways, maybe to sanctify yourself, your own way to grow up in the Lord, your own plans, your own ways to seek the Lord. Even when we seek the Lord, we can't actually seek the Lord the way that we want to. Some people think like, I want to spend, 10 hours a day seeking the Lord, but God's saying, no, I want you to work 8 hours a day and spend 2 hours in prayer. right? And so some people, they had their own agenda of how they want to do it. And because of that, when they're trying to seek God in the way that they want to seek God, they're finding it dry. They're finding there is no life. Why is that? Because self-will. So we have to understand, even when it comes to our devotional life, even when it comes to seeking the Lord, it still has to be submitted to what he wants. You know, King Saul, you'll notice that he wanted to do a fast and it wasn't in the will of God. And what happened is it led to the people eventually sinning. And so sometimes there's certain things, religious activities, where it seems like it's the right thing. And sometimes because it's motivated by self-will, it actually takes us out of the will of God. Because true faith, right? True religion, true faith, and true relationship with God is letting go of self-will. So we can do a bunch of Christian activities, but if the motive is still self-seeking, if the motive is still, I want to do things my way, then it's not true faith. We can do all these religious activities, but the essence of faith is, God, it's your will, not my will. It's your way, not my way. It's, God, spend me how you want to spend me. God, what type of relationship do you want with me? What type of devotional life do you want with me? So it's all about God. That is the essence of true faith. David, before he did anything, he sought the will of the Lord. He said, God, should I go to battle with these people? So self-will has to be taken out of us, because self-will, was a defining characteristic of King Saul. The reason he fell a lot of the times is because of self-will, his own agenda, his own way of trying to please the Lord, his own unlawful sacrifices. Saul fell because he offered up an unlawful sacrifice. Like we talked about in the previous video, what God desires is obedience and not sacrifice. He doesn't want our fastings, and he doesn't want our own way of praying and our own way of worshiping God. He wants it done his way. That's why the Bible says, when people offered sacrifices, it had to be done in a certain way that pleased the Lord. It had to be done his way. And so that has to be our heart when we're seeking the Lord. There has to be a submission, and there has to be a letting go of control.